This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. I am excited to get into today's episode because I love the weather, and we are talking about a topic everybody knows about plainly, but we're going to go way deeper.
Yes, this is going to be so interesting. So what problem are we solving today?
What happens when we get too much precipitation?
Yes. What happens when we get too much precipitation? Living in Florida, I know just a little bit about this, as you do living in Colorado, different types of precipitation. So who is our guest today, Jeff?
Our guest today is the awesome Robin Fox. She is a service hydrologist with the National Weather Service in Spokane, Washington.
Welcome to the show, Robin.
Well, thanks for having me. This is great.
We are going to have so much fun. I always like to start out with, so you work for the National Weather Service. As a kid, were you always interested in weather?
Yes, for sure. Yes, I started as a meteorologist. Yeah, and weather got me hooked. Most people that get into the weather service, they got interested as a kid.
Like, what did you do? Did you like to watch the storms, or did you track storms with the clouds?
Actually, I think I watched a lot of weather on TV when I was a kid, especially the evening news, because that's where you saw meteorologists when I was little. And then thunderstorms, they first scared me.
Yeah.
But then my mom made me sit and watch a storm and saw the lightning and thunder, and I was mesmerized. I said, This is so cool.
I feel the same way.
I wanted to learn more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay. I love that. And I love how you mentioned just watching the weather part of the news on TV, because especially as a kid, before you start learning sort of, as a grown-up, you start learning where you're going to find out the weather, because that becomes part of your planning every day and every week. It always seemed like the meteorologists, the weather people on TV, were omnipotent. Somehow they had information about winds and water and whether it's going to be sunny, and they could forecast out several days. Was there any particular part of it that really caught your interest?
They had all of the great graphics that I loved. And it's the warning part of it, that this thunderstorm was going to be moving through, bringing, the heavy rain, the hail, the winds, and going from this city to this city. And just knowing that really was exciting. And kind of amazing to follow.
I'm with you like that. I think weather is amazing. As a kid in elementary school, there actually was a tornado that touched down across the street from the school. So I remember as a kid, being afraid of it, because I was probably in first grade or something like that. But afterwards, everybody walks over there to see kind of the damage. Thankfully, nobody was home that day, but it's incredible to see what nature can do, right? The power of it. Is there anything that you can think of that you have seen, just the storms and all that kind of stuff?
Oh, I've been doing this for so long. I've been through all different types of storms. Yes, and as a meteorologist, as a hydrologist, all of that, we get excited about natural disasters. And I know that seems kind of strange, kind of weird, but we like to see floods. We like to see big thunderstorms, but we have to keep in mind what that does to people as well. And I know that, people get scared by these storms. So one thing I like to relate is how to be prepared and what to do when those storms come to an area.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
It's good to be
Right.
prepared and not scared. So
Ooh, I
that's
like
what I like
that.
to point out.
Okay. I think we'll get into that a little bit later on. You just said a word, and I mentioned it in the introduction. Can you tell us what is a hydrologist?
A hydrologist is a scientist that studies the water.
Ah,
So
Okay.
all different parts of the water. And for probably many of the people listening to the show, they've heard of the water cycle.
yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And knowing how water moves from the atmosphere to the ground to the lakes and the rivers and again, and that cycle of water
Right.
is so key. And also knowing that water, we've only had the same amount of water on this planet for
Yes.
thousands and millions of years. It
Yes,
just
Right.
yes.
keeps being recycled over and over again.
Right.
So
And
that's what a hydrologist studies is the water.
well, that kind of leads into what happens when we get too much precipitation question. But can you kind of tell us the different types? Because when people think of precipitation, a lot of people just think rain, right?
Right, right.
So, but there's other kinds. What all kinds of precipitation
Yeah.
can we have?
So precipitation is part of the water cycle. It's
Right.
when we get that water vapor too heavy in the clouds and it's got to
Yep.
fall out. And the type of precipitation has a lot to do with what is going on with the temperature in the
Ah,
atmosphere.
okay.
So
Okay.
when the temperatures are above freezing from the ground all the way up to the cloud, going to fall as rain,
Okay.
liquid, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so when the temperatures are below freezing from the ground to the base of the cloud, it's going to fall as snow.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those are really easy. If it's really cold, it's going to fall as snow. If it's warm, it's going to fall as rain.
But sometimes you have like freezing rain and
Mm,
sleet and all that.
yes. So that's what's really amazing and how weather and water kind of move together
Yeah.
and describe precipitation because with the weather we can have different air masses, warm air masses and cold air
Okay.
masses and
Yeah.
Oh,
sometimes they
okay.
mix. So when we have just the cold air mass but a little wedge of warm air, that precipitation falling through it is going to cause the snowflakes to melt and then
Ah.
refreeze into sleet. So little
Oh,
balls of ice that fall.
Kidding.
yeah.
Yes,
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I know. And then as that wedge of warm air gets deeper, we can get the precipitation falling as rain. But if the surface temperature, the ground temperature is below
Right.
freezing, it's going to turn to ice on the ground.
Oh,
And
yes.
that's
Right.
freezing rain.
Okay. Those are all the fun types of
The
precipitation.
fun type, yes. And
As long
and
as
then
you're
we
in the house watching them, not in
Yeah,
the car
exactly.
driving
Not
through them.
driving.
no, don't wanna do that. And then hail comes from thunderstorms that grow
Oh,
about 3 to 5 miles high in the atmosphere.
right.
So the top of the cloud is below freezing, and the forces in a thunderstorm cause precipitation to cycle through the storm.
Oh,
So you
wow.
can have ice on the top of the cloud that tries to fall out, but the
Right.
forces in the storm actually kick it back to the top again of the storm. So it gets layers of ice from the
No
Oh,
updraft
kidding.
in the
which
storm.
then makes the balls of hail or whatever.
Yes, the balls of hail that
Oh,
vary in size. So you can have hail as small as a pea or with a big thunderstorm as big as a golf ball or even bigger.
whoa,
Yeah.
whoa. That's fun
Sadly,
on
I
your
live in
house.
one of those areas of the country that gets sometimes those golf ball hails
Oh,
here in
wow.
Colorado Springs. So, yeah, when we hear hail, it's get your car under something.
Yes.
I
I
would
Yes.
think
never knew
so.
that the hail was cycled through,
Yeah, I
and
didn't know
that's
that.
how there is so much to learn about all of this. So let's jump into our question. What happens when we
Yeah.
get too much precipitation? And I will let you start with whatever type of precipitation you want to.
Right.
Right, right. So, like we were saying, precipitation can come in all forms, but I like to talk more about the liquid type because that's what people are really familiar with. When we get
Yes.
too
Right.
much rain, what happens? when rain hits the ground, it wants to soak into the ground.
Yes.
But if we get
Yes.
too much, too fast, it's not going to have time to soak in. I like to think
Yep.
of the
Makes
ground
sense.
as like a sponge. So
Yep.
it's going to
Okay.
soak up the water. But if the ground is wet or saturated, it's not going to soak in, and it's going to pool up and puddle and can lead to flooding.
Yes.
So that's one of the main concerns. We get too much rain. It can't soak into the ground. It can't do that water cycle and go to the next step. It's going to lead to flooding. And that is one of the concerns that as a service hydrologist that I have is I look for when we could get into flood events with too much rain
Right.
coming down. And areas in the northern part of the United States, you also have to worry about getting too much snow that when
Yes.
it melts, that can lead to flooding too. So
Right.
too
Sure.
much of any precipitation can lead to flooding. And flooding can happen quickly, called flash
Yes.
flooding.
Right.
And that's when you get flooding within hours of the precipitation falling. A lot of times that comes from a thunderstorm producing heavy, heavy rain. And that's when you see the flooding happening in parking lots and on streets
Like
and
lower areas. Yeah.
lower areas. That's right. That's right. So flash flooding is a really big concern because it can catch you off guard with all that rain coming down and causing flooding. And the
Right.
biggest concern with that is being in a vehicle, because
Yes.
if water is pooling and moving water is very powerful and
Right.
can sweep cars off the pavement and with the current. So that's a really big concern with flash flooding and moving water. It can sweep cars, it can lift trucks off the pavement too. In fact, it only takes a foot of moving water to lift a car off the pavement.
Wow.
Whoa.
And fun fact, up to 2 feet of moving water can lift a truck, even a semi, off
Oh
the
my
pavement.
gosh.
Oh, wow.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah,
So
so it can be scary.
yeah, so I have a rather fun story with that. If you remember Hurricane Andrew, if you guys, this was what, 92? So I'm dating myself here. My husband and I were living in Norfolk, Virginia. We were actually on our way to fly, like I think we were going on spring break, or I don't know, we were going on, and our friend was driving us to the airport, and there was a flash flood on one of the main streets, and you didn't know until you came upon, we're like, what are all these cars? Because it was a dip in the road.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
my friend was like, I can drive through that. So she takes her low car, and we're like, I don't really think so. And she goes in, and the waves are coming up over the top of the
Oh my
car.
gosh.
Oh,
Right?
that's scary.
Oh my gosh.
And we're like, and so what happens? Well, the engine stalls right in the middle of it, right?
Yes.
And we're like,
Yeah.
okay, what are we going to do now? Because it's pouring, cats and dogs. It's pouring. And my husband looks around and he goes, well, there's a sunroof. We could like maybe climb out the sunroof. She goes, no, let's just get out. She opens the door.
Oh no.
All of a sudden, we're sitting in like 3 feet of water.
Oh my goodness.
It was like a
That's-
very new car. And I looked at John, my husband, and I go, what do I do? And he goes, well, open the door. I mean, I
We're
was
wet
like,
now.
Water's there. Yeah.
And if this wasn't back in 1992, they now call those YouTube videos.
oh yeah, there you go. But my point is kind of what you were saying, because when we got out, then we were like, first of all, it was freezing. It was so cold water.
Oh my gosh.
But we were like walking against this, like it felt like it was a river, and it happened in like 30 minutes or something.
Yes.
Because there was so much rain from Hurricane Andrew. We all know how big Hurricane Andrew was. But yeah, so from then on, whenever we see low rows and lots of rain, because we get that a lot in Florida because of hurricanes, we are very careful and we go the other way.
Good job. Good job. That's right. We have a saying in the weather service about flood safety: turn around, don't drown.
There you go.
Oh,
See?
well,
Yeah.
simple, accurate.
Effective.
Effective. Yes. And to be safe, go uphill too. Go up
Yes,
and away
we
from
did.
the water.
Okay. So, as a service hydrologist who's paying attention to these flooding events, aside from, I imagine you are trying to get as much information during the event as possible to help those that are closest, give them good information. What else are you tracking? Like, are you trying to, within certain areas, are you trying to figure out if areas are more flood susceptible,
Yeah.
or are there things you can change in the future?
Well, with an event like flash flooding, it's probably being happening from a strong thunderstorm or a
Yeah.
hurricane.
Hmm.
So the meteorologists are tracking these events. And when
Right.
there is the threat for that, putting out warnings to
Okay.
release for the public. So flash flood warnings go out to try to alert the people so they don't get stuck in a flooded roadway.
Right.
And in fact, we have the capability with some warnings that they're going to ping on your phone if it's really bad.
Yes,
So if
I
you
Okay.
get those
are,
in Florida. Yeah, we get those
yeah,
for hurricane and flash floods and all that kind of stuff,
to,
which is
to,
good to know.
yes, yes. So
Yes.
try to get the word out where those risks are so you can stay away from that and be safe. So that's one part of my job is getting that information out and communicating those
Hmm.
threats and
Okay.
where we can see that.
So, do you guys know? Because I mean, you probably know where you live and like where I live. There are certain areas that even if it just rains hard, you know that it's probably going to flood or something like that. Are you
Yes.
guys aware of that and telling the public about, hey, this is a bigger rainstorm. You're probably going to, this river might get up to here. Do you do all of
Right.
that too?
Yes, yes, we do. And in fact, so flash flooding is just one type of flooding. Then there's
Hmm.
river flooding that
Right.
we have river gauges along the river that can tell us if
Okay.
the water is
Okay.
rising or falling. And with the amount of precipitation that's falling or in the forecast, we actually have forecasts on some rivers that will tell us how high that river is going to get in
Oh,
the
yeah.
future.
Oh, okay.
So we can get the message out on that if there's going to be river flooding. And we also have lists of what areas get flooded
Yeah.
on these sections of the river so we can relay
Right.
that to people to let them know. So that's also really important. And I know for my area in the Pacific Northwest, we're getting into the spring runoff season. So when the
Mm,
mountain snow is coming off, and
yep.
that's
Right.
with the rain is going to cause our rivers to go up. So we're keeping an eye on the wet systems and the snow melt and how that all comes to play with the river rises that we see in the springtime.
Wow. I think water rules all, doesn't it? I mean, it goes where it wants to go.
It does. It does. And it's so important for my job is to know where those flooded areas
Yes.
are and keep track of that. So when it happens again, we have that information to share with the public so they know what to expect when we get similar flows. So
Oh, yeah.
I feel like Americans move around more than we used to. And I feel like it's becoming more important to not just wherever you move, like on this call right now, we have three different time zones and three completely different areas of the country represented right here. You really need to understand your area and where you live for what those threats and possible conditions may be.
I agree. I agree. And it changes to different parts of the country. I know where I am with each season, we have different threats.
Yes.
So
Right.
we can have flooding pretty much any time of the year, but predominantly spring into summer, which
Right.
also matches the
Okay.
thunderstorm season. And then there's the winter as well with the winter storms. And being in the Western US and also parts of the Central US, there's also fire season.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's a
Why,
whole
yes,
other
there
season
is.
Yes.
with that too. So
Yeah. We have that here in the South in Florida. We have hurricane season that lasts almost half the year, which is so fun. But you keep saying about preparations. Do you have any specific preparations that you'd like to share with our listeners?
well, I think it's always good to work with your family on putting
Mm-hmm.
together a plan
Okay.
Let's say
Okay.
you are in different areas, like at school or at work, finding a central point where if you need to, you can't go home. Maybe there's
Right.
a
Oh, that's
grandma's
good.
house
Yeah.
or a friend's house that you can meet. Also, have phone numbers already ready to go. I know most people have them in their phones, but
Yes.
actually knowing the
Know
phone
them.
numbers, know them.
Yeah.
If you need to call grandma or somebody like that, is
Oh,
always good. So having a plan is good. I think another good one is having an emergency kit, whether it is
yeah.
for each person
Okay.
or for the family, that has water and flashlights and snacks and extra pair of socks or a
Mm-hmm.
sweatshirt or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Something that you can grab and go in case you have to leave the house.
Yeah. Our weather people too do a fabulous job here in Florida of saying, okay, it's time to put your hurricane pack together. And so there's lists. So I think wherever you live, the weather service does a fabulous job of telling people, giving them clues and lists to prepare. So make sure that you do that in your area.
Yes, very good idea. And also, when we're talking about hazardous weather, understanding the difference between watches and
Oh,
warnings.
yeah, exactly.
And when you hear that there is a flood watch or a severe thunderstorm watch, what that means is conditions are favorable for it, these conditions, but it's not
Right.
happening yet. So you have time to
Right.
prepare. Maybe grab that bag, throw some things into it, just be on alert. But when you
Right.
hear a warning is out, like a severe thunderstorm warning, a flash flood warning, or even a tornado warning, that means it is happening now and you need
Yes.
to act now. You need to take action and go to your safe place. So understanding those terms are really key as well for talking about hazardous weather and flooding.
Okay.
Exactly.
Very good advice. And the best advice is the advice that's actually heeded. So hopefully our listeners will go do this for wherever their area of the country is or wherever they may be when listening. Speaking to a hydrologist and talking about all things water, we were talking about all different types of precipitation. You mentioned the lakes and the rivers and water hitting the ground. As a hydrologist who works with water all the time, and you already mentioned that you've been doing this a long time, this is a very general question, but I want to see where you take it. What is something about water that you know very well, being a hydrologist, that you wish the rest of us would know a little bit better?
What do we know about water? Oh man, that is a good question. Well, we talked about when we get too much water, it leads to flooding, that
Yep.
also water moves downhill. That's always key to remember. And that temperature causes different precipitation. We covered all of that. We talked about when we get too much precipitation falling, that leads to flooding. When
Yes.
we don't get enough,
There you go.
that can lead to
Okay.
droughts.
Right.
So
Right.
droughts happen when we don't get enough. And in the Western US, a lot of our precipitation is driven in the cold season, the winter, the
Yep.
fall, winter into the spring. And it kind of depends where that storm track, where that jet stream is. So where it's going to get that precipitation. And some
Right.
areas don't. And then you run into not enough. And that is called a drought when we don't get enough precipitation.
Right. And droughts can lead to fire season.
Yeah.
It's a whole
Hello,
cycle.
Colorado.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole cycle. But the other thing I think is a great point to make is that it's important. Like you have to have the snow to have it melt so that you
Right.
have the water so that and some people think are like, oh, snow. That's how we get fresh water, right? Like
True.
that's how
That
the whole
happens.
cycle works.
I know. And we don't want to get upset that there's snow falling, even though it kind of makes me a little sad because it was snowing here today. But I have to think it's good because we need to get it in our mountains. We need to
Yes.
build the snowpack.
Yes.
So we're good when we get into the warmer time of the year.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. We have had a lot of fun talking about weather and learning about all the hydrologists. But now we're come to the part in our show where we ask our guests to give our listeners a challenge. I'm very
This is
curious
gonna
what
be
your
good.
challenge is, Robin.
Okay, my challenge to give talks about precipitation, and I want to challenge our listeners to measure and keep track of how much precipitation falls each day.
Ooh.
Now, you can use a rain
I like
gauge
it.
if you have one, but I know not everybody has one, and that's okay. If you don't have one, you can easily just put a measuring cup outside and see how much falls. And then keep track of that every day for a week or
Okay.
maybe a month. I don't know. Depends how much it rains or if you get tired of doing that. But it'd be really fun to see how much falls in your area. So that's one thing that I do for the fun of it. I keep track of precipitation.
I love it.
Yeah.
So I want to challenge that. And then maybe an extra credit. We can compare that precipitation to how much water you use
Ah,
on a specific task that you have to do every day. And that includes brushing your teeth. How about that?
I like that.
I like that.
So
Yeah.
extra credit is I want you to see how much water you use with brushing your teeth by keeping the stopper in the sink, and see if you can measure that out and see how much precipitation falls to equal that.
Yeah. Well, that's
I
because
like
then
that.
now we're learning about water usage, right? And what is,
Yes.
yeah, I love
That
that.
is a
How much
great connection to
falls?
make.
Falls from the sky with how much you use when you brush your teeth.
Yeah,
Compare that.
that's
I
I
like that.
That's
And
fantastic.
I know some of our listeners are weather geeks, just like you were when you were a kid. So they are
Yeah.
definitely going to do this.
Absolutely.
Oh, good.
Absolutely. This has been so exciting and interesting. I've learned a lot
Yes.
of cool things about the water cycle. Thank you so much for being on Solve It for Kids, Robin.
Thank you, Robin.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Where we live, we all get precipitation. I love topics like this because they
Yes.
touch all of us. And for the
Absolutely.
most part, we're really not thinking about it until we talk to somebody like Robin, who knows so much. And then it just becomes fascinating. That was awesome.
Yes, that was. And it was so informative too. And there's so many different kinds of precipitation, right? Like we usually think rain, but snow, sleet, all of these different types. Hail. I mean, there's so many different types of precipitation. And I loved her challenge, didn't you, Jeff?
Oh, absolutely. I love when the challenge makes our listeners and everybody involved do it more than once. So measure and keep track of the precipitation in your area each day for a week, or if you're looking for extra credit from Jen and I, do it for a month.
There you go.
And I love the way we also talked about comparing whether or not how much you measure is the same as what your local meteorologists were predicting for that area.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of cool because you can check up on them and see how they did. And also, as we all know, different areas of the city or where you live might have different levels of precipitation. So you never know about that. If you do this, we'd love to hear from you. We are at Kids Solve at Facebook, X, and Instagram. So shoot us a message or tag us, or you can find out more on our website, solveitforkids.com. We'll have weather information there, as well as some book recommendations so that kids can learn more. So don't forget to check us out.
So until next time, Jen and Jeff will be paying attention to the precipitation in our area. But until the next episode, you'll hear Jen and Jeff on Solve It for Kids.